Hello everyone, this is Chunky Egg here. Just thought I'd do a little progress video. What you'll see in here at the moment is a viewport from Blender 2.8. You can see the LiDAR data, which is what's selected here. I've done it so it's set to wireframe, so you can see what meshes I've created. So this is actually set to the full resolution, so it's for the whole area. You're looking at 4.3 million triangles, which is quite a bit. Luckily, I've got a nice beefy laptop, so it seems to handle it okay. It's just when I go to undo, it don't like me too much. So let me just hide this little bridge because I'm going to do a little run through. So the main thing that I've been doing over the last couple of days is basically finding a method to create a consistent track surface, which basically pre-UV mapped and allowed me to do a lot of getting rid of a lot of fiddly work which had been taking me a long time. So anyway, the way I've done it is I created a 10 meter by 3 meter track section with, I think it works out about 2 or 4 meter is that. Anyway, as you can see, it's got the extra bit of grass verge, and then created a curve of the outline of the track, including all the little extra bits you had to do the different configurations and the pit lane, and then taking those meshes, using the array modifier to match the length of the curve or spline, whatever you want to call it. Created the array modifier. I've then added the curve modifier on top of that or below that, which then basically attached the track section to the spline or the curve, which then meant that because I've done the array already, that's basically just duplicating the track area. It just meant that all the UV mapping's done, because I spent an absolute age doing it all individually. It was a complete nightmare and totally the wrong way of going about this. But I think for this blocking out stage, this is the way you got to do it. This is like my first, sort of big detail, massive scene like this. So I'm making mistakes, but I'm learning from them and improving every time I do a new iteration. So what I'm going to do now is I'll show you a run through. So I do Shift F, plop my camera down. Textures are still, the materials in general are still quite, still work in progress. I can see straight away that some of the settings are a bit extreme, but it's mainly just so I had something on screen that I can then start tweaking. And I just wanted to start doing things like this grass verge texture. It's basically broken down into 2 segments, and within my texture map I've actually got different types of verge. So you've got like a transition coming out to sort of this kind of level, and another one where it's muddy and it transitions out. So basically, if there's places where the cars sort of come out wide on a bend, and they've basically got all the mud, taking the mud away, I've already sorted that out. I can just move the UVs about for a particular tile, and that'll sort it out. But something else I didn't mention about the track section is that once I've done the array and the curve modifiers, I then put a shrink wrap on, setting it to project positive and negative on the Z axis. Because the splines or the curves for the track are already over the LiDAR data, it just meant that it made this stick to the track, and it's not trying to push vertices beyond, it's just moving it on the Z axis, which is exactly how I want it. So there's as little distortion as possible. And as you can see, there's lumps and bumps. It's working quite nicely. It's doing its job. And the good thing is that what I can always do is for the collision mesh, I can up the resolution of this track, and that'll capture more of the lumps and bumps. But for the visual mesh, I think this should be enough. Although there's a few little things that I need to find out about that's going on. So anyway, I'll start my little run through. So what you're seeing here, like I said, is the low poly track, and I've started blocking out buildings and things that you may spot as you're driving around the track. So you've got the monument over there, which if you're going along the top straight where you've got the road bridge, if you were to look to your right, you'll see this just before you head to the first corner, final corner. That I'm blocking in, like where the stand is there. I've still got to put in the gate that's around this area. And it's got like 2 little houses attached to it. I wasn't actually aware of it until I looked at a load of photos recently, and I actually spotted it, because usually cameras are like looking at the action. But anyway, you can sort of see where you do need more resolution for the track for like the collision version. And you can also see here where this is actually from another spline, taken from another spline or curve for the pit lane. The next stage is to actually start cutting into the geometry and merging in things like the pit lane to the main track. So we'll keep moving. I'm actually going to take the wireframes off because it's a bit distracting there. I just wanted to show you how things were looking. So as you can see, I've blocked out the pit lane building, mostly to get a feel for the scale. So using the LiDAR data, I got the heights right. I then looked at a lot of the photos of the pit straight, trying to get this right. I've actually subdivided these so that there are 28 pit slots. Just got to make sure I've got the widths right, and start adding like the actual walls, and then start building into the pits. But for helping move blocking out, this is ample. What you can also see here is this is where the pit wall, where the LiDAR data, I think it's bled over a bit. It's not quite right, or I might need to tweak the width of the track. But this is something I can always sort out. I'll probably flatten out the LiDAR data. I know where the wall will be. I'll create like a proxy mesh. So anyway, you can see here the pit lane there. You got the stand that's on the first corner. But I'm loving how the LiDAR data has sort of added all this bumpiness. And again, you can see where the pit lane's not been put into the main mesh. You've got the, I think it's a conference centre over here. You've got a restaurant in there, if I remember right. You've got this weird T-shaped building. I think it's like a factory. Don't know too much about the infill buildings as such. But anyway. One thing I haven't done here as well is where you go off to this section of track. As you can see, it's not been, I haven't meshed it in yet. We'll take the long route, and I'll show you one of the reasons why I went for LiDAR data. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit because it's a long straight. So here we are. This is the bit that convinced me to go with LiDAR. Now, I was starting to watch a lot of YouTube videos of events at Oulton Park, and originally I was using OpenStreetMap data. So if you imagine, it's a bit like Google Maps. They use like a terrain data. I'm not sure how they generate it, but it's not a very high detail model. And when I created the first iteration of this track, I got to this point and then did a freeze frame of a video showing the real track. And my version, that hill there was not as pronounced as that. It was a lot more flat. Let me show an example. Let me just see if I can find one. So if I put the terrain on, and then I'll take off the shrink wrap that I've put on it, you'll see how much of a difference it is. The landscape isn't right. So that is why I made the move to using LiDAR data. So although it's been a bit of a ball ache, it's been well worth doing. Just going to switch the this terrain data off. I'll get back to that in a minute because that's been very useful with for working out some finer details. So anyway, I'll quickly run you through the outline of the track. There we go. Whee. Now, something that I mentioned before was I need you guys' advice. Something that I've noticed with the curve modifier is that basically there's plenty of geometry to get a really nice curve. But as you can see, it does it in, I think basically it's several. There you go. You can see there. These edges aren't actually creating a smooth curve. Now, if there's a way in which I can solve that, that'll be brilliant. Because I'm thinking with all this geometry that I'm using, if I'm getting this kind of look, it's going to ruin the whole feel of this track. So anyway, let's go back to this. I have to excuse that big floating, what you call it, gizmo. So then we've got the choice of either going left through the chicane or going straight on. We'll go straight on for now. And again, it's not been meshed in yet, so they're all separate elements. But again, I'm just loving all these lumps and bumps. And I'm looking forward to actually trying this in Assetto Corsa to see how much of a difference it makes. And then again, we got the come around here, around here. This is actually original LiDAR data which need to be hidden. There we go. So you'll see a lot of little bumps like that. Is where there's a few remaining points that from things like trees, walls, and all that. That's just showing through. So this track is using the that decimated, well, the currently undecimated mesh. And again, little bump there. So we're now coming up to the final corner. We've got the final grandstand there. Again, I'm just blocking things out just so I've got frames of reference, especially when I'm doing the. I'll start doing comparisons between YouTube videos and what I'm seeing in the viewport. So basically, we're now back to where we began, and of course this needs to go because all this is concrete or road surface. But again, this is just where I've just got to the point where I've created the general shapes. So if I go to, I'll change the visibility. There we go. So you can see here, there's still that building to sort out. And basically going through and just trying to get these little details sorted out. But one thing I did start playing around with is to go in using the sculpt tools. And if you imagine with this, I've gone through, created a decimate modifier. And then if I go to, for instance, I'm doing this to 0.25. So a quarter of the detail. Now the problem is that it'll just do it as a percentage. Doesn't matter how can I put it. If you mesh like this, where the scans were done over diagonal strip, some of the density was quite low, whereas other places are quite high. So when you do a decimate modifier, it will actually affect the overall mesh. So places that are quite sparse will get even worse. As you can see, I've just done quarter of the detail, and as you can see there's a exact thing that I'm talking about here. If you notice this side, this is taken from one section of LiDAR data, which is not as detailed as this one. This meant that what I'm hoping to do is play around with breaking this down into areas, let's say like that kind of area. I then go into the sculpt tool and use the simplify tool to with dynamic topology to basically reduce the polygon density. Once everything's more consistent in terms of detail, I can then use the decimate tool, and it'll be a lot more accurate. Yeah, I'm not losing detail in areas like this. So so that's going to be my next thing. I did try playing around with using the decimate, using the this tool on a sort of a big area, and it just killed my system. Even though it's a very recent laptop, AMD system with a decent performance, but it caused the system to slow right down. So that is going to be the next thing I'll do. Like I said, break it off, make sure that wherever I decimate, I don't do around the edges, merge it back in with another piece, and then do a new segment which overlaps. So then that way everything basically welds back together again. Because one thing I found was if you decimate too much, you end up losing your seams. So when you merge two segments together again, you end up in a situation where the edges don't match up again. So you then have to go in and actually create new geometry, which sort of defeats the point of the LiDAR data in a way. I don't know if I'll actually use this directly, but from a performance point of view, it would be useful, when it comes to editing, because what I actually want to aim to do is have control over the geometry, things like edge flow, the outlines and so forth, because by doing that you can optimize this with a lot more control, rather than going straight in using a decimated version of this mesh and then trying to make it work with UV seams. And especially if you've got, like, for instance, what will happen here is let me just zoom back in. So if you imagine you've got this verge texture, which, as I was saying before, has got loads of different variations on the same texture image. I'll see if I can bring over an example. Grass, here we go. So here's an example here. So you've got, this is what you're seeing at the moment. It's basically this area here and this area here, because it wraps around. I've got basically a UV island up here, one down here. And then if I wanted to create like a deeper area, I can do. I could probably be even more ruthless with this and actually do it so that I'll do another one here. But then it does mean that I'd be more limited in how far out I could go with this geometry here. So also, as you can see here, I've created another version. This is what I was talking about, where cars basically come onto the grass, come off the track onto the mud, and have basically worn away the grass around there. These will probably get refined as I work, because as you can see, there's seams everywhere. Main thing was just to have something in place, trying to sort of prove the system works. So as you can see, you've got a lovely seam there. This one's not so bad, because it was only designed for this kind of look. This is what I started to do yesterday, after I finished work, and I started to think, right, can I push these textures more? Because originally it was quarter of the size, but I've basically pushed it out. So I think it's 4096 by 4096 texture, which I probably will scale down. And of course, I've got the bump and the speculars. Oh, wrong one. That's how my bump looks at the moment. I just went in with Affinity Photo, tried a few different filters just to try and get some information in there. I'll probably try and play around with another map. So I'm not sure about what maps are used in Assetto Corsa. So this will be like a new lesson for me. But anyway, I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much for listening. And hopefully with the next update, I will try and do a run through of actually doing this, going into the LiDAR data, basically breaking up into areas, using the sculpting tools to basically smooth away details I don't want, like for instance, things like these walls here, the pit walls and so forth, and also simplifying the mesh, or I may even just add more detail into like these sparse areas, so that we can do it. So I can do like a proper decimation of the whole mesh once it's all merged back together, and it'll be consistent. And that should mean that I'll get more better performance, basically. So anyway, this is Chunky Egg, and I hope to see you soon. With another update.